Otto's work, DTF, Dialectical Thought Forms, has been the biggest thought analysis problem solving tool I have ever come across. And Otto's work, when applied to problem solving, because that's my background, that's what I focus on, particularly the climate issues, it's so far in advance of other analysis systems that it's almost a joke when you think of the other systems. They're 1/4 or 1/5 as powerful. And his DTF, Dialectical Thought Forms, are critical to solving the problems that the world has to solve right now. It is essential that more people learn these techniques. Otherwise, we are going to have bad leaders making bad choices, and we will suffer bad consequences. And the world is in enough trouble right now that we absolutely have to learn these newer techniques. There are hundreds of studies that come out on the climate every year. I probably read 20, 25,000 pages of climate studies. And I look at these studies and I see them as a collection. I don't look at them monolithically. I see them as a broad spectrum describing different parts of the many parts of the climate system. What I do is I use the 28 thought forms, the process, the transformations, the relationships, and the context, and I look into the data and I look for errors, I look for patterns, and I look for omitted data. And the hardest thing to find is what's omitted. Absolutely the hardest thing to find is what's omitted. When you use these 28 thought forms, you're looking at it from so many angles that what is omitted almost pops out at you, because the thought form says, where is this that should be there? And you go, it's not there. And this was a critical omitted piece, which allowed you to see a greater pattern and to understand the relationship between multiple climate systems. So the climate has 12 or something major systems: the oceans, permafrost, the atmosphere, water vapor, etc. And you're watching all these systems interdependently and interconnectedly interact. And what Otto's system does is it allows you to look at this interaction from ways that you could never see it, not even in system theory. System theory was a great advance over just regular logic. But with being able to see it 28 different ways to look at a single moment in evolutionary time, it allows you to see what no one else has seen, to literally see what no one else has seen. I wind up looking at patterns that I go, how could these other researchers not see this? I look at these omissions and I go, these omissions are serious. How could other people not see it? And I look at errors that if I had not seen the data moving through these 28 perspectives, I wouldn't have seen the errors between one study and another and those interrelationships and how that affects our future. So his work has been instrumental in really taking climate science and pulling out the errors, looking at the deeper patterns that have been missed, and speaking a deeper truth that could not be seen if it wasn't for his tool. It simply could not be seen. I'm not saying I'm the brightest guy in the world, but I'm saying his tool makes me look like I'm a lot smarter than I am. Otto's work has to be spread worldwide, to political leaders, to our intelligence agencies, to our intelligence analysts, to major executives, to everyone who's handling critical areas of life. Because if you can't see context, you can't see processes, relationships, and ongoing transformations, and then the 7 subsets of each one of those 7 subset perspectives, you will miss reality. You will miss the fine details, the patterns, the errors, the omissions that will cause undue pain and suffering for humanity. We need our leaders to learn this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I'm extremely happy to be here because, as I will briefly outline, promoting Otto's work, spreading its influence, is very important for the future of humanity, for the future evolutionary success of humanity. My scientific work focuses on the big picture of evolution. In particular, it looks at the trajectory of evolution, where it's come from, where it's headed to. It reveals that there are two main directions to the trajectory of evolution. The first is towards increasing integration. Since life first emerged on this planet, living processes have, in a stepwise manner, increasingly become integrated. And we can use that understanding of that trajectory of evolution to see where it's headed, and importantly, to see what the next steps that humanity must take are. And the next step in terms of integration is the ultimate integration on a planetary-wide basis of living processes, with the emergence of a global, cooperative and unified society of human beings that manage the living processes of the planet into a unified whole. The second trajectory of evolution, and this is the one that brought me to Otto's work, is towards increasing evolvability. Evolvability is the ability to adapt and to evolve, the ability to search possibility space in order to identify how to adapt and how to evolve. When evolution first began on this planet, it had very low evolvability. It proceeded through blind trial and error. It searched possibility space through a mechanism that had no foresight, no ability to look ahead. So with the trajectory towards increasing evolvability, eventually, as we know, it produced human intelligence. Human intelligence is distinctive in the sense that it enables humans to form mental models of phenomena and use those mental models to predict and plan for the future, to avoid dangers and so on. So that evolution of evolvability, when we see the trajectory, we can see what the deficiencies are in our current intelligence, our current ability to evolve, and it enables us to see how those deficiencies can be overcome and what the next great step in the evolution of evolvability on this planet is. And basically, that step is towards intelligence, the capacity to build mental models and use mental models that can capture complex reality. So I was also, in addition to being propelled in this direction of investigation by my work on evolution, I've also had a personal interest throughout my life since I've been an early teenager on working on myself. That is, on self-scaffolding, on building my own capacities in the social emotional area, plus in relation to cognition. And given that I was interested in evolution, I was particularly interested in systems perspectives, the big picture of evolution. So I became focused on and an expert on systems thinking and so on. However, whilst I developed capacities in that area through trial and error, stumbling into possibilities and so on, and even though my antennae were always out over this last 55 years to find ways of scaffolding and improving cognition, both to assist and do what I could to propel the evolutionary development of humanity towards increasing evolvability, it also was a major personal interest. However, even though my antennae were out, I couldn't find anything. So it was an enormous, it had enormous impact on me when I came across Otto's work in the first decade of the 20th century. And what I saw there astounded me, because I expected that if I ever did come across techniques for scaffolding metasystemic or dialectical thinking, the ability to form models of complex reality, then I thought that it would be in a half-baked form, it would be a first approximation, it would be a first draft, so to speak. But what astounded me when I came across the Manual for Dialectical Thought Forms was that here was something that was fully formed, highly sophisticated, could be put to use immediately, and could be used to propel humanity's evolution and enable humanity to overcome the complex existential threats that are currently threatening, endangering the future of humanity. What the thought forms do, what the moments of dialectic do, is identify the limitations of our current thinking. They identify where our current thinking is deficient. It identifies for our model building where the models are inadequate, the things they leave out. And then, most significantly of all, the thought forms identify where we have to move our attention, where we have to move our consciousness in order to fill in those absences, in order to develop models that are comprehensive and models that finally can capture what most of reality is like. And most of reality cannot be understood by mainstream science, which is powered by analytical rational thinking, which is mechanistic and limited. Most of reality is too complex to be captured by that, and it needs tools that identify how the thinking has to be expanded, how our attention must move in order to develop complex models. So Otto's work made an extraordinary impact on me. I see it as the key to propelling the next great step in the evolution of evolvability in living processes on this planet. It's the key to that, and it's the key when applied to overcoming the complex existential threats that currently threaten humanity. So I'm extraordinarily happy to be here tonight to do what I can to help promote Otto's work, because the spread of Otto's work is critically important for the future evolution and survivability of life on this planet. Thanks.
Putting my thoughts together before coming into this call, one of the quotes that kept going through my head is what Newton apparently said. We said, if I've seen further, it's because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. And that, I think, really applies, Otto, to what you've created with your entire body of work. It really is a giant piece of work. And it's something that I've found incredibly useful over the past 15 years since first encountering your work. And it's something where the more I put your work into practice, the more I realize how little I know about it and how little I understand it, and how much more I need to work with it to really master it, if it can ever be mastered. And where it's useful and where I really underline again what has been said, this is something that I believe everybody ought to know, just in the same way that a few hundred years ago, people were beginning to realize that everybody ought to have a basic level of literacy and numeracy. One of the things that I learned in my first career as a physicist is that there is nothing more practical than a good theory. And this is what your body of work is for me. It's a superb framework that I can use as a practitioner in business to really look at what is present, what's missing, and how can we arrange this in such a way that we can see clearly what are the systems, what are the structures, what are the processes, what is the interrelatedness, and what are the potential transformations that we can bring in. And this last one is critical. I left my job with Procter & Gamble in 2008, very frustrated and very much in despair at the inability of a company whose purpose is to improve the lives of the world's consumers to actually do that over anything longer than a quarter, and instead primarily taking decisions for smooth returns to investors. And that has led over the past 15 years to myself and my colleagues developing a new way of incorporating that fully includes all stakeholders effectively. Just before this call, I was listening to a podcast from Yanis Varoufakis, and he was saying we need a way of governing companies. And what he described is exactly what we developed 10 years ago and have been putting into practice over the past 10 years in more than 50 companies around the world. A core part of that was the recognition that business lies in 6 ecosystems, from the inner ecosystem of each individual all the way up to ecosystem 6, the global economy. And that was something that was initially for me primarily intuitive. It just made sense to me, but I hadn't really thought it through fully. And it was only in dialogue with Otto that I truly understood how all of that fits together. And in particular, what I really mean when I use the word ecosystem is both the systems and structures and the interactions and agencies in such a way that neither of them is conflated into the other, but truly treated as distinct components that are inseparable. Yeah, and without that insight, I wouldn't be doing much of what I'm able to do now. I wouldn't have written the 2 books the way they are. We wouldn't have got to the deep understanding that when we talk about a company or a person, we can't think of what that company is at a point in time. We can only really work with that company when we look at its entire path from beginning to end. Same with a person, we have to look at the whole path. And that led to my second book, The Ergodic Investor, because the statistics you have to use when you're looking at an entire path as the fundamental unit, rather than discrete, disconnected moments in time, is fundamentally different statistics. And economics not being aware of that is why almost all businesses today are built to fail. They're built to perform below average. That's why we have climate change and so many other aspects of our polycrisis. And I'll give one final example of where Otto's work has been seminal for everything that I've been doing. It's led to my co-author, Jack Reardon, who's an economist, the 2 of us proposing a radical new approach to economics as a discipline, a discipline that needs to build off the entire body of Otto's work, not just the 28 thought forms, but also everything that is in the entire elements of socio-emotional development, everything around the integration of systems and interactions as an approach to economics that puts individual human meaning making center stage, that starts by saying every decision that any human being has ever taken was completely rational at that moment in time within their internal frame of reference. And looking at people as paths, looking at economics as as a consequence of individual human meaning making, we see having a lot of potential to bring economics to the point that is actually useful to us in solving the challenges of our polycrisis. Yeah. So in essence, it comes back to people tell me that what I'm doing is very insightful and helpful and pointing the way to a promising future. And it's very clear to me that I would not be able to do that without all of the shoulders I'm standing on. And one of the critical shoulders is Otto's shoulders, because this theoretical framework enables me to scaffold and structure and see more clearly. It gives me a lens to see more clearly what's important in everything I'm doing.
So as I was reflecting on my 15-year-old journey with working and collaborating with Otto, what came to mind was the impact he had on me personally and on my own development. And I think this is the most significant contribution that Otto made to my life. Because when I met him, I was working on my PhD and I decided to use his methodology for my doctoral research. At that time, I wanted to change the world. And as I was studying with Otto more and more, I realized that I needed to change myself before I go out and change the world. So I started a very, very intense journey on discovering and rediscovering myself first. After all those years, I can just say that I'm still at the beginning and I am still fascinated by Otto's work and wanted to make it available to others, not only to myself. So after developing that sense of my own identity and how it's changing and how I'm negotiating with myself different parts of my own identity and my own growth. How is identifying different patterns and the way of seeing the world, interpreting the world. I've spent the past, I would say, maybe 10 years in a very unsettled state of self, in that constant and permanent process of deconstructing and reconstructing myself. And it was only in the past few years that I was brave enough to reach out to others and bring Otto's work to my audiences, my students, and my clients. And I realized very quickly that 28 thought forms were not a way to introduce Otto's work, so I simplified this 28 thought form framework and made it accessible to wider audiences. So I created a 12 thought form framework, and 12 thought form framework, I've been working with this ever since. And that has been very effective. And I also recently sponsored a documentary about Otto's life, and I will say a few words about it in a moment. So Otto's approach, what I found that Otto's approach to adult development is very unique. It's profound and the most comprehensive method I've ever seen. However, it has to be carefully introduced to those without prior knowledge of adult development and dialectical thinking. So I feel like I'm running a preschool for future dialectical thinkers, people who have potential to develop into complex thinkers. So I use dialectical thinking in conjunction with transformational learning, leadership studies, and with organizational development and change. As I said, I work exclusively with 12 thought form framework in a simplified way, and I'm preparing my clients to then come to Otto and to my colleagues and learn more complex way of using this framework. So in summary, my work hardly produces earth-shaking shifts on a massive scale. I work with those one person at a time. One class at a time, I help people disengage from their own perceptions, cultivate curiosity, shift perspectives, and see what was previously unknown to them, and I'm hoping that I planted seeds for them to reach the point where they can feel that they can make significant change on a big scale. So while Otto's monograph bridges the gap between dialectical and systems thinking, my teaching bridges the gap between linear and logical thinking to systems thinking. So looking at myself and looking at my clients and my students, developmentally and constructively, has been a way of that permeated my life. And the most rewarding outcome of this work is knowing that my best work is still ahead of me. So with those few remarks, I just wanted to introduce the documentary that has been dominating my life over the past 2 years. And I want to tell you about the documentary, Otto's Life and Legacy, and tell you a little bit about how this movie came about. So first, I want to publicly acknowledge the movie director, Marko Stanić. So how this movie came about? As I became increasingly familiar with Otto's artistic work, I was fascinated by his ability to effortlessly move from poetry to visual arts, to science, and his passion for music and his ability to find infinite possibilities for expressing expanding his scientific work at the same time. So most people who know Otto, they know Otto as a social scientist or a poet or musicologist or visual artist, but no one could fully grasp the complexity of his own life. So I felt an urgent need to capture the richness of Otto's life. So I reached out to Marko, who was passionate about documenting people's life stories, and I shamelessly exploited his interest and convinced him that producing a documentary about the extraordinary, rich and multifaceted life of Otto Laske would provide him with a unique opportunity to pursue his passion to the fullest. So he accepted the challenge without knowing what he was getting into, and you will see the results of his tireless work. I cannot thank him enough for his time, talent, dedication, and selfless commitment to this work. Marko, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for all what you have done on this entire documentary. And now I want to invite everyone. Hi. Yeah.
I detached myself from Germany. I always say that when I've stood at the pier in Bremerhaven and the ship at midnight began to move, the whole burden of European history fell off my shoulders. My parents were all about learning. So there was no way I could have become a farmer. No. It was, how can you develop yourself cognitively?
At the time, I was so passionate about poetry. It was my life at the moment. And so the thing that jumped out in this ad was that he was a poet. So I didn't care about anything else. It was like, wow, meeting an older man who's a poet is quite interesting.
You would have to be an idiot not to ask yourself, what is music? What is behind music? What is the thinking behind music? We can research that. We don't have to think historically about music. Music happens in real time right now. Any conductor, any violinist, any musicologist who does an analysis is working in real time. He is inventing music in real time. Not back then, but now. There is always an energy flow, there is a rhythm, there is a totality, and there is movement. Nothing is static. That's why I call it visual music. I think it was 91. I had no place to go. So I said, okay, this is the end of the road. I'm going to Harvard. And so in that sense, I think even CDF is a work of art. Not in the way it's constructed, but in the way it can be used. You can use it artfully. You can use it dumbly, you can use it expertly, and you can use it as an artist. It's up to you. Incredible thing is that you can stay identical with yourself only by constantly changing, by metamorphosing. And therefore development is about loss of self. We can do a little bit to change the world. I owe it to Lawrence Wollersheim and John Stewart to have made me fully aware of the analytical potential of dialectical thinking. My own work and Eva's work and those of many of my students, including Jan, has been to work with people, either one-on-one or in teams, in real time. And the term in real time is very important to all of us who work with thought forms, because we think all the time and we don't realize that we think all the time. And when we listen, and much of my work has been about teaching people to listen, we realize that we ourselves are in constant internal conversation with ourselves, that we can actually systematically analyze by way of thought forms. And once we are aware that we, each of us, is constructing their own world every microsecond until death, unbeknownst to us, we can say, oh, it would be nice to know a little bit more about my own conversations that are deeply buried in me. And so that's one reason to read my book, to realize that they can be recovered, so to speak. And also that the world, that everybody of each of us is creating his own world, and that it is a totally wrong assumption to assume that other people are living in the same world. There are, of course, connections between our personal worlds, and one of them is cognitive and can be analyzed or understood in terms of thought forms. But the maybe perhaps much stronger relationship between our worlds is emotional, or as I say, social emotional, and that too can be researched in terms of meaning making. So I would say to Jan, to answer his question, why should one read the second edition of this book that is now 15 years old? I have this book is on cognitive development, and a few people have read it over the 15 years that I have taught. And they have mostly told me how difficult the book is. But those who have worked with me personally and have made case studies of other people by interviewing those people and then analyzing what they have said in a 1-hour interview, both social, emotionally, and in terms of thought forms, they have what I call gone the royal road of hands-on learning. This book cannot, or the dialectical thinking just cannot be learned by reading. You have to practice it. Whether you do climate analysis, as Lawrence does, or evolutionary analysis, or you help companies design themselves better, than they do now, or if you work as Eva does, and I have done a great deal with people, either individuals or groups, you need to be in real time and be aware of what you are listening to, what the structure is of what you are being told, and that what you're being told comes from a world that you are not in, and that therefore you have to take the greatest care to get into, and maybe you never get into it if you don't know how to listen. So listening, so that's, I think, why this book should be read in a second edition. I think also that these books could be a bridge for you to a new understanding of yourself and the world you create entirely on your own terms and largely without your knowing. Because the book shows you that your world is like nobody else's. And so I recommend to read the books foremost in order to get to know yourself better. And as Socrates would say, to become a better friend of yourself, and thus also a better friend of the world around you. I would say looking back at your own life can be difficult and also exhilarating. And I would say in my case, it was both. It was difficult in that I was discovering things about myself that I didn't know. And I was entirely, during the making of it, but also in viewing it, taken aback by how emotional I was about my teachers. Of course, my parents and so forth also, but especially my teachers from Adorno to Jacques. It apparently was not what they taught me, but that made such a big impression on me, but how they did. And also when I studied with them, they stood for me, outside even of the personal relationship. That really astonished me. You know, I found myself standing right next to Adorno, and I couldn't take it. So there are many other things I found remarkable. Above all, the many shoulders I'm standing on with my work, or, you know, the many shoulders my work is standing on, that all I did was made possible by a culture that I was unaware of and that I had the privilege to be part of and thus also to carry on. And that includes also you, my students, that I am standing on your shoulders also. I cannot thank you enough about working with me and working with me in the future also. I interpret the term success as a Keegan prompt in a social emotional interview. It is a term having to do with what I will have to overcome to have outward success or have already overcome. It is not with outward success, but what I need to be like to have that success or to be aware of it. So I probably have to overcome the notion that my social science work and perhaps my artwork too is esoteric. I have to come to believe that complex thinking, to speak just of thinking, can be learned by more people than I have taught over 15 years or will be teaching. I say in the documentary that there is no social forcing function to go to self-authoring. And self-authoring is a term in the developmental sciences that implies that you are living and working and acting and sleeping too on account of your own internalized value system, not that of others, that you're not defining yourself any longer by others' expectations of you, but your own expectations. And that when you are disappointed, you are not disappointed in the world, but in you, in yourself. So there is no such social forcing function, which I think we as teachers of complex thinking have to stand in for. So establishing a worldwide program for dialectical thinking by itself will not do. Success could perhaps lie in reaching those people who have a need for mental growth, even if only for the sake of their mental health. I think a lot more people can learn complex thinking if given institutional structures that support them in learning complex thinking, including about themselves, whether these supports are educational or organizational, and they don't exist. There is no university that at the highest level teaches dialectical thinking. And so we are on our own for now to begin doing that. So I might say that it would be my dream that thinking about your own thinking does not remain something out of reach for you and becomes or moves into a reach of a lot more people than now reflect on the structure of their unceasing conversations with themselves.
You can order Otto's book almost on all online bookstores. The documentary, as I've announced, will be available through Vimeo.
Thank you all.